Hey guys, welcome to Module 3. This week's short module lecture, I'm going to highlight this week's writing assignment, which is the only assignment that you have this week. So make sure you give this one some work and effort. It may require you to maybe make some phone calls. If, for example, you're interested in your local probation department and being a probation officer, it might behoove you to call them and find out what the hiring process is like so you can add that to your paper. So again, do your research, do your homework, and make sure you do a good job on this short paper. All right? Because it's good that you understand what the hiring process is all about, because oftentimes give you some idea as to what you might need to do to prepare for a career in either law enforcement or corrections or in the courts via probation or parole officers. So give this some attention, and I think you'll be okay. It should be an interesting paper for those of you who really haven't spent the time yet to begin to evaluate what it's going to take for you to get into a specific field in the criminal justice system. Okay, so let me go ahead and disappear here, and I'm going to go to the next slide. And I just want to briefly go over the assignment guidelines for this week's assignment, so you have a clear idea as to what the expectations are. So this week you need to select a specific department you might want to consider for employment opportunities in the future. So that might be your local county probation department or your local police department. And that should be the focus for this assignment. Okay, so if you want to be a police officer in your local police department, let's say your local police department is Orange, California, because I have a job flyer from Orange, then you need to go to maybe their website or some other research and find out what it is that they require for one to be a police officer in that particular community. All right, because everything changes from city to city and county to county. So again, select a specific department. That's going to be the important part. Next, you need to choose from either a police department, Department of Corrections, or a probation officer. So you're going to collect three. You have three choices. So again, police department, Department of Corrections, which could be a correctional officer. I'll even accept a parole officer because they typically work for state as the Department of Correction. Probation officers typically tend to be a county function. Some states, they sort of mirror or combine those together. You have parole / probation. So again, find an agency that fits an agency that you'd like to work at, and then it's either it has to be a police department, a Department of Corrections, or a probation officer. Okay, and then you need to describe the hiring process for your chosen departments. Now, the hiring process needs to be in chronological order. In other words, what are the steps that have to take place? So what's the first thing you need to do? What's the second thing that happens? The third thing that happens? All the way up until the time you get hired. In some agencies, maybe it's only 3 or 4 steps. In some agencies, it might be 5 or 6 steps. So you need to describe the hiring process for me for the department that you selected and the field, law enforcement, corrections, or probation. And then you need to describe those in a chronological order. In other words, what do you do first? What do you do second? What do you do third? What's the hiring process like? So this is the hiring process, for example, in law enforcement. And I do this one because I'm more experienced with this one. But typically, I mean, we'll start with the job application, which can be very important. I mean, the job application is an organization's first look at you in terms of your ability to follow directions, your ability to complete a job application completely. A lot of times, job applications, if they are not completed properly or you leave things out, then they set it to the side and you're not going to be considered because they have maybe they got 100 applicants for a couple of jobs. They don't have time to call you on the telephone to find out, when did you leave this previous job and when did you start this new job? You didn't complete those dates. So the job application is the organizations first look at you. So when you do a job application, make sure you do it well. Make sure you check your spelling, your facts, and everything is correct. Okay. Next step, at least in the law enforcement field, is going to be a written test. And that's going to be important because in law enforcement, we do an awful lot of writing. You have to be able to put your thoughts together. A lot of these tests will have a reading comprehension element. In other words, you might have to read a paragraph and then answer some questions to make sure you understand what you just read. Because remember, as a police officer, you have to have the ability to understand and interpret the law. So you have to quickly to determine what type of crime you're investigating or what type of crime somebody might have committed. So you need to be able to have those skills. And oftentimes, a lot of these things are captured in the written test. So the written test is very important. Most states, probably through their police officer standard of training, have standardized tests that agencies use because test writing is a skill. And so even in California where I worked, we use California post tests. The state develops the tests, and then it's a lot easier for us just to get a different version of that test and use it as our first written test and the first part of the overall process. So sometimes you might be given common sense type questions. Maybe you'll be given a street map, and then you have to determine the easiest way to get to a specific location, something along those lines. You'll have a reading and writing comprehension, those type of things. All right. So the written test is really the first step in the process. Then typically there's a physical agility test. Now the physical agility test is usually going to be based on some job-related function for being a police officer. And obviously police officers have to have the ability to run, jump, maybe drag a body so many feet, get it out of the way if there's a vehicle fire or a house on fire or whatever the case is. So each state might be a little different. So if you're interested in a career in law enforcement, you need to make sure that you are physically fit, at least for the ability to pass the physical agility test. And the physical agility test is typically pass, fail. All right, so you either pass it or you don't. And even though you might pass a written test, if you fail the physical agility test, then you're no longer considered a viable candidate. All right. So we have these two things that we take care of. Now, sometimes some agencies do these all on the same day. They might have the written test in the morning, physical agility test in the afternoon, and so the applicants just have to come down to the police department or sheriff's department, wherever you're having this particular physical agility test or written test. Just have to come in once and complete both of those. Depending on how you do on the written test and physical agility, then you might be scheduled for an oral interview. This is an opportunity for the agency to get to know who you are, for you to understand the expectations that you might have for the job. So you can ask questions as well about the job. The interviewers will ask you questions, most certainly. Sometimes it's as easy as, why is it that you want to work here? I mean, why did you pick this police department as a place that you wanted to work? And of course, a lot of times it's an opportunity for the agency to evaluate your common sense abilities through the use of maybe some type of scenarios that the board might ask you. In other words, given a specific set of facts, how might you respond to this? Just to see if you have common sense, all right? How would you deal with this problem? And there usually doesn't require any specific law enforcement knowledge. It's just really to see your thought process and whether or not you can think logically and get to a conclusion that's fairly acceptable. All right. So it's the oral interview process. Again, it is a way to get to know people. It's a way for the applicant to get to know the agency, what the expectations are, and then whatever lingering questions the applicant may have. But it's also an opportunity for the agency to assess your skills. Remember, as a police officer, even as a probation officer, and potentially as a correctional officer, you're dealing with people every day. You're talking to people every day. You may have to appear in court and testify. So your ability to speak clearly and express your thoughts clearly is important in most jobs within the criminal justice system. Okay. Then we're going to do the background. The important thing to note here is that the first 4 steps typically are low cost to the agency. There isn't a whole lot of cost involved in any of these other than maybe some of your personnel time. The remainder that we're going to talk about are more labor intensive and may cost you more money. So if an applicant gets through the written test, physical agility test, oral interview, then we get to the background process. Now, most states, and I know in the state of California, we have a standardized packet from POST, our Peace Officer Standard and Training. It's a standardized packet, the background information that every applicant has to fill out. And it's like 30, 35 pages long. So it's a rather long process. And so, as such, it's something that an applicant needs to take his time for, make sure he does it correctly. And then obviously if he has any questions, he or she should contact the agency representative that they're dealing with. The background is going to, it's going to cover everything: your life history, your job history, your educational history, and any interactions or negative contact with police, an array of things. All right, previous employees that you work with, previous employers, all of those kind of things we're going to get to know about you. Your financial situation, how much you own credit cards, do you own a home, do you not own a home, things like that. All right, so that's the beginning of the background process. And the background process can be very labor intensive, but it is probably one of the most important steps in the process. You have to let your background investigators travel wherever they have to go to make sure that they get the information the agency needs to make sure that the person you're hiring is the person that's best suited for this job. Okay. If you're successful in the background, then we have the polygraph, and the polygraph often has standardized questions, usually drug use and a few other things. But sometimes there may be issues that pop up in the background that need clarification, and so a polygraph is the best tool to use for that. And then that's typically followed by a medical examination and psychological examination. Obviously, we need to make sure that the person we hire is best suited for this job, both medically and psychologically. And so agencies hire psychologists to conduct their psychological testing and so forth. These are expensive tests, so they're typically toward the end. Some agencies may not do psychological, and I think that's probably not the best thing to do anymore. They do cost money, but it is essential that we make sure we hire the right person for the right job, okay? And that that person has no underlying psychological issues that's going to impact his or her ability to do a good job for you. Okay, so this is basically the hiring process in a nutshell for a police officer. As part of your writing assignment, again, you need to explain the purpose of each step of the hiring process. So if I go back here, you would tell me what's the purpose of the background, what's the purpose of the polygraph, what's the purpose of the oral interview. So not only are you describing these steps, but now you're going to describe for me the purpose behind those. So do some homework, do some research, ask some questions, and seek those answers to these type of questions. Okay. Then finally, you need to provide an overview of the department you selected by briefly discussing the size and type of department you identified, your department overview. In your department overview, you may include their specific requirements, educational. For example, let's say law enforcement again, some law enforcement agencies will only require that you have a high school diploma. Some might just say all you have to have is a GED. Some might say you have to be 21. Some might say you have to be 23. So look at those unique things for the agency that you selected. So you have a good understanding as to what it is that they require. Okay, so that should be part of your overall paper as well. Then your paper needs to be at least 1 to 3 pages. And here's the specific criteria. And then you have to have at least 2 sources cited in APA format. Okay. So this week it has to be a paper, not a PowerPoint. Let me repeat that. It has to be a paper, not a PowerPoint. All right. So I've given you some ideas here. If you have any questions, let me know. But again, do some research. You're going to have to do some research for this assignment. You don't have a discussion assignment this week, so give you full attention to this assignment. All right, thanks. Bye.